It is the afternoon of November 25th, 1177. You are standing on a ridge in the Levant. The sun is beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the sand. The air tastes of iron and dust. You look forward. The horizon is moving. It is a sea of yellow banners, a tidal wave of steel and flesh. It is an army of 26,000 men, the greatest fighting force the Middle East has seen in a generation. They are rested, they are confident, and they are led by the legendary Saladin. Now, look to your left and right. You do not see legions. You do not see a massive host. You see 500 knights. That is it. You are outnumbered 50 to 1 by every law of war, by every calculation of mathematics and logic. You are already dead. Your body is covered in sweat and chainmail, but the man leading you is covered in bandages. He is 16 years old. He cannot feel the reins of his horse because his hands are rotting away. He is Baldwin the Fourth, the Leper King of Jerusalem. Most men would flee. Most men would surrender. But the boy in the bandages raises a sword he can barely grip. He doesn't order a retreat. He orders the charge. This is the Battle of Montgisard. It is the single most impossible military victory of the Middle Ages. But to understand how a dying boy broke the spine of an empire, we cannot just watch the battle. We have to understand the science, the politics, and the biology that made this moment possible. If you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Narrate Hist Arena. To truly understand the stakes, we must first stop the narrative and look at the medical reality of the man at the center of this storm. We need to understand what leprosy actually meant in the 12th century. Today, we know this as Hansen's disease, caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae. It is a chronic infectious disease that primarily affects the peripheral nerves, skin, and mucosal surfaces. But in the Middle Ages, this was not viewed as a biological infection. It was a spiritual sentence. The Levitical laws of the Bible declared lepers unclean. In Europe and the Holy Land, a diagnosis usually meant a civil death. A funeral mass would be held for you while you were still alive. You would be cast out of society, forced to live in a lazar house, and made to wear a bell to warn healthy people that a monster was approaching. The disease works by attacking the nerves. It causes a total loss of sensation. This is the cruelty of it. The disease doesn't cause your limbs to fall off directly. It numbs you so completely that you injure yourself without knowing it. You burn your hand on a candle. You cut your foot on a stone. Infection sets in, and gangrene follows. That is what causes the disfigurement. Baldwin the Fourth was diagnosed at age 9. His tutor, William of Tyre, noticed that when other children dug their fingernails into Baldwin's arm during play, the prince felt no pain. By 16, the age of the battle we are discussing, Baldwin was disintegrating. He was likely losing sensation in his hands and feet, and his face was beginning to show the lesions that would eventually blind him. He was a teenager who knew he would never marry, never have children, and never grow old. He was a dead end. And yet, this decaying boy was the only thing standing between the Christian world and total annihilation. Now, let's zoom out from the biology to the geography. The year is 1177. The First Crusade is a distant memory. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was a thin strip of Christian territory running along the coast of modern-day Israel, Lebanon, and Palestine. For decades, it had survived because its enemies were divided. The Muslim world was fractured into city-states. Damascus fought against Cairo, Aleppo fought against Mosul. The Crusaders survived in the cracks of this chaos. But that era was over. A new power had risen. His name was Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the West as Saladin. We must understand that Saladin was a genius of statecraft. He had done what no one else could. He united the Sunni Muslims of Syria with the wealth of Egypt. If you look at a map of the Middle East in 1177, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was no longer a neighbor to squabbling tribes. It was in the mouth of a vice. To the south lay Saladin's Egypt. To the east and north lay Saladin's Syria. The Crusaders were surrounded. Saladin possessed the manpower of the north and the gold of the Nile. He had built an army designed to erase the Crusader presence entirely. In the autumn of 1177, Saladin received intelligence that the kingdom was vulnerable. The bulk of the Crusader army, including the heavy infantry and many of the military orders, was distracted in the north, fighting a pointless campaign in Syria. Jerusalem was open. The gate was unlatched. Saladin mobilized 26,000 men. This wasn't a raiding party. It was an extinction event. As this tidal wave crossed the border near the fortress city of Ascalon, panic swept the land. Smoke from burning villages choked the sky. Refugees flooded the roads. Baldwin IV was resting in the south, managing his pain, when the news reached him. His advisors, looking at his bandaged hands and the overwhelming numbers, told him to flee. They told him to hide in the fortified city of Ascalon and wait for a siege. But Baldwin possessed the fearlessness of the damned. When you have already lost your future, you lose the fear of death. He realized that if he hid in Ascalon, Saladin would simply bypass him and march on Jerusalem. The holy city would fall, while its king cowered. So, the Leper King ordered his horse saddled. He couldn't grip the reins, so he had his grooms tie them around his wrists. He scraped together every man he could find, about 500 knights and a few thousand infantry. He marched into Ascalon, and the trap snapped shut. Saladin, seeing the tiny force enter the city, made a fatal error born of arrogance. He left a small detachment to block the gates of Ascalon to keep the cripple inside, and he turned his massive army north toward Jerusalem. He ignored Baldwin. He thought the war was already won. While Saladin marches toward Jerusalem, believing he is unopposed, let us pause to analyze the army he was commanding. Why was 500 against 26,000 considered impossible? It wasn't just the numbers. It was the quality of the troops. At the core of Saladin's army were the Mamluks. We need to explain this term because it is crucial to military history. Mamluk means property or owned. These were slave soldiers, purchased as young boys from the Turkic steppes. They were converted to Islam and raised in barracks with one singular purpose: war. They were subjected to a training regimen called Furisiya, which taught martial arts, horsemanship, and archery. A Mamluk was not a peasant conscript. He was a professional killing machine, armored in lamella steel, riding the best horses, and capable of firing arrows with deadly accuracy at a full gallop. They were fiercely loyal to Saladin, Surrounding them were thousands of light cavalry and Sudanese heavy infantry. This was a combined arms force. Logistically, moving 26,000 men and their horses requires a supply chain that stretches for miles. Saladin, confident that Baldwin was trapped, allowed this discipline to slip. He let his army disperse to pillage. They spread out across the countryside, looting villages, slowing down. They were essentially a massive, slow-moving traffic jam armed with swords. Back at Ascalon, Baldwin saw what Saladin had missed. The blocking force left behind was too small. On the morning of November 25th, Baldwin ordered the breakout. The gates swung open, and the 500 knights smashed through the thin Muslim line. They were free, but now they were in the open desert, miles behind the main enemy force. Baldwin pushed the pace. He led his knights up the coast, riding hard, chasing the dust cloud of Saladin's army. They were riding into the mouth of the beast. Riding with them was the ultimate psychological weapon, the true cross. This was a large wooden cross, encased in gold and jewels, which the Crusaders believed contained pieces of the actual cross upon which Jesus died. To these men, this wasn't a symbol, it was the physical presence of God. It turned a suicide mission into a holy pilgrimage. Now, we return to the ridge. The location is Montgisard, near the modern site of Geza. Saladin is crossing a wadi, a dry riverbed. His army is strung out. His baggage train is clogging the road. His men are thirsty, tired, and disorganized. Many have taken off their armor to escape the heat. Suddenly, the ground begins to tremble. A low, rhythmic thrumming rises from the south. The Ayyubid scouts look back, and their blood runs cold. Baldwin appears. The surprise is absolute. The wind is blowing from the north, kicking dust into the faces of the Crusaders, but it doesn't matter. Baldwin dismounts. He falls to his knees in the sand before the true cross. He weeps. He prays aloud for victory. Seeing their dying king, a boy who should be in a hospital bed, weeping and begging God for strength, the hardened knights are filled with a terrifying resolve. Baldwin is hoisted back onto his horse. He signals the advance. Here, we must understand the physics of the Frankish knight. In the 12th century, a heavy cavalry charge was the equivalent of a kinetic missile. A knight, his armor, and his war horse combined to weigh over 1,500 pounds. They rode with long ash lances couched under their arms. When 500 of these missiles hit a stationary target, the result is physics, not magic. Baldwin's wedge slammed into Saladin's disorganized flank. The sound would have been like a thunderclap, wood shattering, metal crumpling. The Crusaders cut right through the light cavalry. They weren't fighting for territory, they were headhunting. At the tip of the spear was Odo de Saint-Amand, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar. The Templars were warrior monks. Forbidden to retreat, they smashed into the Mamluk Imperial Guard, and in the center of the melee was Baldwin, the king with no feeling in his hands. He was likely strapped to his saddle, guiding his horse with his knees, surrounded by his bodyguards. The sight of the Leper King fighting on the front lines shattered the morale of the Egyptian army. They believed he was cursed. Seeing him here, destroying them, made them believe God had switched sides. Saladin watched in horror as his nephew was cut down. The Mamluks, the best soldiers in the world, were breaking. Saladin, the great conqueror, narrowly avoided capture. He abandoned his war horse, jumped onto a racing camel, and fled into the desert. The battle was won, but the slaughter had just begun. And here is where nature turned against the Sultan. As night fell, a freezing torrential rainstorm swept in. The Crusaders chased the fleeing army for 12 miles, until darkness forced them to stop. But for the Egyptians, the retreat became a death march. They had no supplies. They had thrown away their armor and weapons to run faster. Now they were facing the Sinai Desert in freezing mud. Bedouin tribes, seeing the Sultan's weakness, emerged from the dunes to attack the stragglers. Of the 26,000 men who marched to burn Jerusalem, it is estimated that only 10% made it back to Egypt. Saladin returned to Cairo a ghost. He had lost his army, his wealth, and his aura of invincibility to a 16-year-old leper. Baldwin returned to Jerusalem a savior. The people thronged the streets to touch his robes. But this victory came at a terrible price. The physical exertion of the battle accelerated Baldwin's condition. The stress, the heat, the friction of the armor against his lesions. It broke his body. After Montgisard, his disease progressed rapidly. He went blind. His hands and feet became useless stumps. He had traded his life force for one glorious victory. And this is the tragedy. Baldwin bought the kingdom of Jerusalem time, about a decade of safety. But the men who surrounded him, the healthy men, squandered it. After Baldwin finally succumbed to his disease at age 24, the crown passed to Guy of Lusignan, a man who was handsome and healthy, but an incompetent fool. Within 2 years, Guy undid everything Baldwin had built. He marched the army into a waterless trap at the Battle of Hattin. He lost the army. He lost the true cross. And in 1187, Saladin finally took Jerusalem. Saladin respected Baldwin. He feared Baldwin, but he had no respect for the healthy fools who replaced him. Why do we remember this story? Why does the image of the Leper King resonate so powerfully with us today? It isn't just about the tactics. It is about the human condition. Baldwin IV represents the ultimate answer to the question, what do I do when life is unfair? We live in an era obsessed with image, health, and perfection. Baldwin lost all of that before he was a man. He was dealt the worst hand imaginable. A rotting body, a certain death, and an enemy 50 times his size. By all logic, he should have been a victim. He should have stayed in his room. But he didn't. He strapped himself to a horse. We all have our own Montgisard. Maybe it is a chronic illness. Maybe it is a financial collapse. Maybe it is a dream that everyone tells you is impossible. You look at the horizon and you see 26,000 reasons to give up. You see the dust rising. Baldwin's legacy whispers a simple, brutal truth to us across 8 centuries. Saddle up anyway. The walls may fall, the body may fail, and the kingdom may eventually crumble. But for one glorious afternoon, if you refuse to bow to the inevitable, you can make even the giants run in fear. What is the impossible battle you are fighting right now? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. And please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and subscribe to Narrate Hist Arena.